Hey, how's it going guys? Kris here, and welcome to another Battlefield 5 weapon guide. In today's video, I'm going to be giving you the complete lowdown on the STG-44. A pretty well-rounded assault rifle that you can equip on your assault loadout, but only when you get to class rank 13 first. So starting off with a bit of background knowledge, the STG-44, aka the Sturmgewehr 44, was something quite special. There's often a lot of debate over which was the first ever proper assault rifle, and the STG-44 is one of the candidates that always gets thrown into the mix. Although other assault rifle styled weapons were designed prior, the STG-44 was basically the first one to be well developed and mass produced. And it was a bit of a revolution at the time, because Germany was basically losing the war and was pretty desperate for something new. The combination of SMGs and bolt action rifles worked fine enough in and between those muddy trenches throughout the Great War, but with combat zones now taking place in more urban environments, having lots of short and long sight lines, a weapon which could cater to all of these ranges would have been a lot more suitable. This became more apparent when the Germans fought the Russians on the Eastern Front, because their submachine guns were too weak to provide much power over distance, yet their bolt action rifles fired too slow, and weren't capable of dealing with Russia's large number of attacking soldiers. Something in between these two types of guns, basically a fully automatic rifle that fired an intermediate cartridge, was a very ideal concept, and that's where the STG-44 came into the scene. Developed in 1942 and pushed into service the year later, the gun derived from a prototype made by German weapons developer Hugo Schmeisser, which was reworked and was briefly called the MP43, until of course its name was changed again in spring 1944 to, you guessed it, the MP44. It was a select fire rifle with a 30 shot capacity fed using detachable box magazines, and as time went on and the MP44 saw limited action on the Eastern Front, quite a lot of positive reports came back to Germany on how bloody good these guns really were, to the point where apparently Hitler himself approved mass production of the rifle and gave the weapon its newer, more menacing name, the Sturmgewehr 44, basically meaning assault or storm rifle, which is where the term stemmed from originally, flowing into present day. The Sturmgewehr designation would have been an act of propaganda, but the name itself actually stuck over the years, to the point where it would be used for an entire category of firearms that utilise an automatic system and fired intermediate rounds. Another reason why the STG-44 is often considered to be the grandfather of all assault rifles, being the gun that was essentially accountable for the assault rifle name. This new breed of weaponry would go on to influence many other designs in the future, like say the AK-47. And although the gun didn't exactly play a massive role in World War II, being developed in service fairly late on, so thankfully the Nazis never really got to utilise its full potential, the STG's assault rifle design legacy would live on in many modern weapons, being one of the biggest advances in small arms technology since the invention of smokeless powder in the late 1800s. So anyway, let's go over those all-important stats and see exactly how the STG-44 fits into Battlefield 5. Just like pretty much all of the other base game assault rifles, the STG is going to deal some very standard damage values, with each bullet dishing out a maximum of 25 up to 10 meters, which is then gradually going to get lower and lower over distance, eventually reaching a minimum of 17 at 75 meters and beyond. So if you do the maths, you'll be able to work out that 4 shots on a close range target is going to be enough to take them out of the fight. Though at most, it could potentially take up to 6 bullets to do the trick, if your opponent is further away in the distance. And due to the way the damage drops off, hitting someone at 50 meters is going to equate to 20 damage. But any further than this is going to drop that damage lower than 20. So basically, despite the minimum damage being reached at 75 meters, you'll still often need 6 shots to kill an enemy before this, as soon as your enemy crosses the 50 meter mark. This gives the gun's bullets an equal amount of stopping power to its assault rifle counterparts, generally having slightly less range than the support's LMGs and MMGs, but a lot more than the medic submachine guns, giving it a fairly well balanced set of figures as a whole. Though the biggest factor that determines the STG's position within the assault class regarding lethality is of course down to that rate of fire, which is sort of in the middle of the others. With the weapon shooting at 600 RPM, it's not exactly a rapid firing gun, capable of competing with the likes of the M1907 SF or a lot of the bullet spewing SMGs, as you're often going to get outgunned within closer territory if you're not careful. With that said, 600 RPM is still reasonably steady, and its decent combination of power, range and speed will often be enough to outperform quite a lot of the other weapons in one-on-one gunfights over a fairly wide range. So it might not exactly be a bully within shorter sight lines, but it's still got plenty of power to do fine enough here in a lot of cases, and be an even more effective weapon further away too. Taking a look at the recoil pattern and accuracy stats, we can see that the STG-44 has some pretty moderate kick values, with a vertical recoil value of 0.67 and horizontal values of 0.21. This pretty much puts the gun slap bang in the middle between the Ribeirol's and the Sturmgewehr 1.5 for its accuracy and stability, being relatively easy to control and aim with, but at the same time, not the best. These values aren't particularly high though, and in most situations, within the gun's optimal range over those early mid distances, the STG's base set of recoil figures shouldn't pose too many problems, basically acting a bit like a less accurate Bren gun, having almost the same vertical kick value with slightly more horizontal drift. This means that it can perform quite accurately in full auto, though you might want to tap and burst fire the gun to keep it under control if your target's in the distance, as though the STG-44 doesn't gain any bonus recoil per shot, it will become more difficult to aim with as you fire away in longer streams, due to that base recoil accumulating over time. Because the STG shoots at a steady pace however, this allows it to stay relatively accurate for most gunfights, as it's got similar horizontal recoil values as the M1907, but that's often going to seem to have less precision, due to its rapid fire rate causing recoil to add up quicker. If you want to improve the STG-44's base recoil values with Specializations, you can, as it's not only got access to the ported barrel, dropping horizontal recoil down from 0.21 to 0.157, but you can also reduce its upwards kick too, lowering that down by 20% by equipping the recoil buffer spec. This will pretty much give the STG-44 the same vertical kick value as the Ribeirol's, and both of these choices help to improve the gun's already reasonable kick values, making it even more usable for longer ranged fights. The fact that the STG's muzzle velocity is also higher than the likes of the Ribeirol's and M1907's also gives it a bit more of an advantage for taking on players further away too, as although it's only got a slight increase in bullet speed at 620 meters per second, this is still a factor that can boost the gun's ranged effectiveness over the others, as you're not going to have to lead your enemy's movements quite as much, possibly making it more compatible with some higher zoomed optics. Now, just like the other storm rifle in the game, the Sturmgewehr 1.5, the STG-44 holds the very same amount of ammunition, because it uses the exact same magazines and fires the very same round. This gives the gun an advantage over the other assault rifles in terms of its reliability, having a higher ammo count than both the Ribeirol's and the M1907. And because the STG-44 fires at a more controllable rate than the Sturmgewehr 1.5, this also makes it a bit more reliable than that too, with those 30-shot mags being easier to manage due to its slower fire rate, allowing you to moderate how many bullets you fire out a tad better. Though despite technically using the same magazines as the Sturmgewehr 1.5, its reload speeds are a little bit different. The STG-44's tactical reload takes 2.4 seconds, and its empty one takes 3.1, giving it fairly similar tactical reloads to the Sturmgewehr 1.5 and slightly more speed when you run it on empty. In relation to the other assault rifles though, this is sort of average, with the Ribeirol's generally having the fastest reloads of the bunch. But unlike some of the other assault guns, the STG-44 doesn't have the ability to boost reload speeds with the quick reload specialization, like the Sturmgewehr 1.5 does. And this might be a bit of a detriment to the gun's dependability within close quarters, as you're more likely to get caught with your pants down in between reloads, with other weapons like the Sturmgewehr 1.5 easily beating the STG-44 when it comes to reload times, when that quick reload spec is equipped. The STG-44's reloads are by no means rubbish, especially when compared to some of the LMGs and semi-autos, but for a box magazine fed rifle, they're not particularly marvellous either, with a lot of the other fully automatic weapons like the submachine guns having snappier mag swaps, sometimes making the STG-44 a bit of an awkward thing to use in hectic situations when you're surrounded by the enemy team. So let's get onto those specializations. First things first, the entire left side of the tree is mainly going to benefit aggressive players more, and the right side is basically all about improving their aimed accuracy. And as you can see, I normally like to run straight down the left side to make the gun feel a bit more usable within those offensive ranges. At the top of the tree, we've got slings and swivels on the left and quick aim on the right. The slings and swivels spec is going to cut down that deploy time and basically let you shoot quicker after sprinting, two things that can come in very handy, especially with the STG's reloads not being particularly fast. So at least you can whip out that sidearm a bit easier when shit hits the fan and you're running out of ammo in CQC. Quick aim is also going to be a pretty good pick too, but slings and swivels is going to complement my next specialization choice a bit more so. That next specialization happens to be the enhanced grips, which basically improves hipfire spread and makes hipfiring much more effective. Now, because the STG-44 isn't exactly the quickest killing machine in the game, being able to essentially cut down the need to aim down sights and use hipfire instead is really going to help to make up for that slower fire rate, still making the STG-44 a pretty deadly option to use within shorter sight lines. With the slings and swivel spec, this also means that you can start shooting from the hip a tad sooner after sprinting too. So should you get caught out by an enemy in close quarters, both of these specializations are going to complement each other quite well, allowing you to hose down that enemy with hipfire fairly quickly and accurately. The lightened stock is also going to give you more maneuverability in gunfights, by increasing your movement speed up by 60% in ADS, allowing you to strafe around to get on target and move in and out of cover easier while staying scoped in. Another fairly good choice that's going to go well with aggressive play. You could choose to boost accuracy instead by picking the options on the right side of the tree, but because the STG doesn't have a particularly high horizontal recoil value, and with its fire rate being on the slower side, it doesn't really need any extra precision for it to do well within those closer to medium ranges. The ported barrel and barrel beddings on the right side will probably make the gun seem a bit easier to use over longer distances, but with the STG being a fairly offensive assault rifle, I find the choices on the left to generally be a better fit. This is also why I've chosen to pick the custom stock at the bottom too, instead of the recoil buffer, because although the recoil buffer's lower vertical kick can be pretty beneficial, and it'll probably let you fire in longer durations while keeping the gun under control, the custom stock's going to go hand in hand with the lightened stock, giving you less spread while strafing around, and letting you take full advantage of that extra movement speed. The STG-44 might not be as accurate or stable without the ported barrel and the recoil buffer specs, but at the end of the day its recoil isn't really all that bad, and you should be able to deal with it fine enough in most gunfights, tap and burst fire in the rifle if you need to take down someone further away, outside of its optimal range. So anyway, in conclusion, the STG-44 is basically the good all-rounder assault rifle, the jack of all trades, master of none. It doesn't particularly have any major issues or disadvantages, but at the same time it doesn't really do anything special, kinda performing at a fairly standard level without having any key features to make it excel over the other weapons. It's not exactly the fastest firing thing in the world, but it's capable of holding its own in a lot of situations. You'll probably struggle to win some gunfights in CQC against a fair few of the other weapons in the game, but generally the STG-44 has a pretty nice balance between its speed and power, and although some of the rapid firing SMGs might give you a hard time within shorter sight lines, it's still got some decent kill times across the board over most ranges, typically being more suitable over medium distances, just out of reach of those faster firing weapons and the shotguns. The STG's recoil pattern is also another thing that's sort of in the middle, as although it's not really a super accurate weapon, it's definitely easy enough to manage within the gun's optimal range, where you're going to be using it most of the time. Prolonged fire is going to cause the gun to become less stable, but this can be easily countered by shooting in shorter bursts, or even tap fire in the gun if you need to land some shots on a target far into the distance. And because the rifle doesn't shoot particularly quickly, this further complements the gun's precision, making that recoil a bit easier to deal with. Another thing to complement that steady but reasonable rate of fire is the fact that the STG-44 can hold up to 31 bullets at a time, so you'll be more than capable of mowing down several opponents with ease without having to worry about running dry in the middle of a firefight. So if you come up against a gang of enemy players that all have their backs turned, you can potentially take them all out easier with the STG than you will be able to with some of the faster firing weapons with smaller magazines, especially with it having better accuracy than most of the others too. Its reloads aren't the best, so this is another factor that could limit the gun's effectiveness in close quarter engagements, but so long as you're aware of your ammo count and don't play too aggressively, the STG-44 will usually provide enough firepower to get you through most battles in one piece. And overall, it's probably one of the most well-rounded, versatile weapons in the whole game, performing fairly well over most distances, without having any big flaws that are going to get in the way of its usability. So that's it for another weapon guide folks, hope you enjoyed it. Thumbs up if you did, and make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay updated with all of that fresh content as and when it's released. Thanks for watching, and I'll be seeing you in that next episode.